So think of all the different kinds of sentient beings in different realms of existence and all the different experiences they're having right now. From beings in the hell realms and the hungry ghosts, the animals, the humans, the desire realm, devas, the beings in the form and formless realms. Such an incredible variety of experience sentient beings are going through right at this very moment. So our stomach may be full and we may be in a beautiful place and be surrounded by kind people. That's not the situation for everybody. So rather than take our own experience for granted, yet let's realize its rarity and then use it to do something that is beneficial for all other living beings. And so even though it's going to take us a long time to get to Buddhahood, in the long term, it's going to be the most beneficial thing to do. And it also enables us in the short term to be kinder and to be more beneficial to others too, and at least to stop harming them. So with that kind of motivation, let's share the Dharma together. So where we left off was, last thing we did was we chanted the verse of taking refuge. And this verse is really quite important. Yeah. So we know the direction we're going in our spiritual practice. And so also, so we can distinguish our real spiritual refuge from religious institutions. Did I talk about that before? Mm-hmm. A few days ago, I want to just emphasize it again because it came up in some discussions yesterday. Our relationship with the Buddha Dharma Sangha, our relationship with our teachers is one kind of relationship. Yeah, our relationship with Buddhist organizations is a different kind of relationship. Okay, and within that, the Buddha Dharma Sangha are always pure. Okay, there's no contamination, pollution, anything in the Buddha Dharma Sangha. And we respect and appreciate our teachers because they're the ones who teach us the Dharma, enabling us to become the Buddha, Dharma, and Sangha. Because we didn't have the fortune to be born when the Buddha was alive. So our teachers are actually doing the same work in relationship to us as the Buddha did in relationship to his disciples when he was alive. Religious institutions are created by human beings. And as far as I'm concerned, the purpose of religious institutions is to support practitioners and to maintain the Dharma. There will be diversities in Dharma traditions and so on, but to keep some kind of framework for that going forward. So not, we don't get all sorts of craziness and degeneration. Beyond that, in my humble opinion, I don't see any purpose for religious institutions. In other words, religious institutions are not an aim in themselves. Yeah, their purpose is to benefit practitioners and to sustain the Dharma. And sustaining the Dharma is different than sustaining the institution. Okay? So sustaining the Dharma We have two kinds of Dharma, the transmitted or scriptural Dharma and the realized Dharma. So the transmitted or scriptural Dharma, that's the word of the Buddha, the teachings that we pass down. It's not the physical thing of the book, okay, or the tapes or the videos. Yeah, it's the actual words of the Buddha that express the meaning of the teachings. And so that's passed down from one generation to the other, from one, teacher to student and so on. The realized Dharma are the realizations that we gain in our own mind, from our own practice. And that starts with just even taking whatever set of pratimoksha precepts we have. Okay? So we can see that Dharma is always pure. Yeah? Religious institutions, individual Buddhist practitioners, we live in samsara. These things exist in samsara. We should not expect them to be thoroughly pure. Okay, it would be nice. And we dream, and in some way our expectations are the way it should be. Yeah, people in the institutions should act properly. The fact of the matter is that is not always the case. Okay? So this is why the Buddha told us to really choose our teachers carefully, to get to know people, to see if they're teaching according to the general Buddhist teachings, to watch their ethical conduct and so on, and not just rush into relationships with somebody as a teacher because they're giving an initiation today and they're leaving town tomorrow, and this is the only chance you have. Okay? But to really check people out. They say that when Lama Atisha went to Indonesia, he checked out Sir Lingpa, his teacher, for 12 years. When we were just in Indonesia, they said Atisha stayed in Indonesia for 12 years, which seems a little bit more realistic to me rather than checking out a teacher for 12 years. But the point is, he checked out Sir Lingpa very, very well. What's interesting in Lama Atisha's relationship with Sir Lingpa is they didn't always see eye to eye on everything. Yeah, Atisha was not a blueprint of Sir Lingpa. Sir Lingpa held the Yogacarya or Chittamadra viewpoint, mind-only viewpoint. Atisha held the Madhyamaka viewpoint. That's a big difference. That's an important difference. And yet, even though they had that difference in opinion, Atisha held the higher view. Atisha had so much reverence and respect for Sir Lingpa because Sir Lingpa was the one who taught him the precious bodhicitta. Okay? So that difference in the ultimate view, or the view of the ultimate, didn't get in the way of their relationship. So it may happen sometimes with our teachers that we have differences of opinion. Okay? This doesn't need to get in the way of our relationship with our teachers. Okay? So I'll start with some examples and that are easy and go on to more difficult ones. Okay? So, for example, one of my teachers who I studied with for years, Khensur Champatek Chok, very precious. He's been to the Abbey a few times. So he was ill when I studied with him at Nalanda back in the 80s, and the doctor told him he must stop drinking Tibetan tea because it has too much salt and it's not good for you. And he should change his diet and also not eat so much meat and fat and stuff. Well, Genzo Rinpoche didn't want to do that. He liked Tibetan tea. He liked his Tibetan meat momos. He ate what he wanted. Okay. Now, he and I had a difference of opinion, and I wanted him to live a long life. And he was doing, the opposite of what the doctor wanted. Yeah. So I could either get mad, I could get disillusioned, and say, oh, but he tells us to follow his teachings, but he's not following the doctor's orders. But none of that it's really rather stupid, isn't it? It's like he has his own life. He can choose what he wants to eat. Yeah. I heard Gelek Rinpoche was the same way. He wasn't one of my teachers, but he was a very well-respected Lama. He ate whatever he wanted, even though he was on dialysis almost every day at the end. Yeah? So people make their own choices. And that's fine. And it's a difference of opinion, and we may disagree, and so what? I didn't come I didn't go to Khensa Rinpoche to learn about diet. I went to him to learn about the path and result of awakening, okay? So that didn't interfere. So that's pretty okay. Most of us can accept that and get over that, yeah, okay. Then, one of my teachers likes to make his decisions by doing mows. Yeah, throwing the dice and then telling people what to do. And, I worked in the organization for a while. I tried to follow that and make all the, I didn't do mows, but I would have to write and ask for them. And then, the mows change all the time. And, you're trying to be director of a place, and the mows tell you to do this one day and something else the next day. And I'm going totally nuts. Okay? It's like I cannot operate by relying on mows. That's not the way I grew up. And I need, to make a plan and try and get the conditions to come forward instead of changing things every day. So, so sometimes I would get really kind of edgy about this, and it took me a long time to chill out and really see, okay, my teacher likes to do this, and he'll even determine what to eat for lunch by throwing a mow. Yeah, so every small thing, every big decision, everything is dependent on mow. So, again, that's my teacher's choice. It doesn't work for me, but that's okay. And not all my teachers did everything by throwing mows. This teacher was kind of unusual in that respect. Okay? So again, it's just a difference in, how we want to live our lives. He wants to do it by throwing mows. I want to do it by, kind of how we do things in the West, yeah. So, that's a little bit more difficult, especially, when you're getting orders on what to do and the changing. So I stepped back from having a position of responsibility because I found it very difficult to fulfill that in a good way because I just, mows were not my thing. And it doesn't mean mows are good or bad. It doesn't mean I'm good or bad or he's good or bad. It's just people have different ideas. Okay. Then I've had teachers who think that women are inferior. And I had one teacher who thought George W. Bush was an excellent president. Okay, so granted, in comparison to Trump, that was true, but this was before Trump became president. So, okay, so we have some differences in opinion about things that are more important than whether you drink Tibetan tea or not. It's like, are women inferior? They didn't come out and say that directly in that language, but you could tell by the way things were done and how other things were said that this was in the mind. So, okay, so what do we do with that? Does that mean that I get angry? Yeah. Does that mean that that person isn't a good Dharma teacher? Does that mean I'm a bad student because I don't believe every single thing, have the same attitude as my teacher does on every single thing? Do I have to become a Republican to be a good Dharma student? Yeah. Do I have to believe women are inferior to be a good Dharma student? Yeah. Does that mean my teacher doesn't know what in the world he's talking about? Okay. So that's one is a little bit more difficult. So I had to realize with that one, okay, again, I came here to learn the Dharma. I didn't come here to learn about gender relationships. Yeah. My teacher grew up in one culture. I grew up in another culture. He grew up in one body. I grew up in another body. Okay? We had different experiences. We grew up in different cultures. We don't have the same idea. I did not come here to learn about gender relationships. I came here to learn the Bodhisattva path. I came here to learn about emptiness. Yeah. I didn't come here, to become a Republican. Yeah. Oh boy. Yeah. And I don't expect my teacher, to have the same political views as I do, because he's thinking of it. The reason he liked George W. so much was because George W. spoke out against China's violation of human rights, which concerned Tibet. And George W. met with His Holiness, and they really got along quite well. So that, in his eyes, made W. a fantastic president. I'm looking at, how he went into Iraq and, what he did, and it resulted in how many thousands of people dying. So, okay, we're seeing things very, very differently here, but he's entitled to his political opinions, and I'm entitled to mine. It doesn't mean that I'm wrong and he's right, or he's wrong and I'm right. Same thing about gender. He's welcome to his own opinions about that, and I'm welcome to my opinions about that. I'm not a bad student because I don't agree with every single thing like that. Okay. In the monastery, we talk a lot about, how, and we say in our morning motivation, that there are different ways of seeing things, but these don't need to become the cause of conflict. So our examples are often, where you put the spatula, because this has been, in the past, it has been a topic of great consternation that has resulted in big arguments. Okay. You know what a spatula is. It's like slightly bigger than this, and you use it to flip pancakes, which we hardly ever have. But we use the spatula for other things. Yeah? So the spatula symbolizes my power over the kitchen, or my correct opinion about how to arrange things in the kitchen. Because my way of where to put the spatula is the one right way, and everybody else's is the wrong way, and they need to respect me because my way is right. Similar to putting cups. Have you ever lived with somebody How many of you put your cups in the cupboard and they're right side up? And how many of you put the cupboards in the cupboard upside down? Okay. The upside downs have it. But if you get a roommate with the right side up, you know, you can get into some really big fights. Why do you put the cup upside down? So the dirt doesn't fall in it. The dust doesn't fall in it. Why do you put the cup in right side up? Because the shelf may be dirty and you don't want to get the rim of the cup dirty. So the thought is the same. The way to actualize it is different. Yeah. And yet we can dig in our heels and get really dogmatic about that spatula or that cup. Okay. So the same thing can happen sometimes in terms of different views with our teachers, because we get very attached to our views and opinions. Yeah, because we would not think anything wrong, would we? We always think only things that are right. But then our teacher, who knows more than we do, and who's leading us to awakening, has some ideas that we think are really like, huh? I thought you were enlightened, and you think he's a good president? I thought you were enlightened, and you think women are inferior? Where does that fit in? So, again, it's this thing of people have different views. Yeah. I can have my view, my teacher can have his view. Okay. And we see, and I told the story about Atisha and Lama Serlingpa at the beginning, because that is a really big, important difference. What you think about women and what you think about W and what you think about spatulas doesn't concern enlightenment. Okay, which view you hold about emptiness does. Okay. But they still got along, and Atisha had so much respect for his teacher. So, nowadays too, we find people teaching, our teacher may have different views than we do. And they may have views that we say, okay, there's scriptural reference for those views, but it's not a view that I can have. I'm not at that level. Okay? So, what's come up often in recent times is, and this has happened across all the Buddhist traditions, the whole teaching on to see the Buddha, to see the Guru as the Buddha, and to see everything that the Guru does as perfect. Okay? And that teaching was taught in the context of people who were about to take tantric initiation. That teaching was not taught to beginners. It was not taught in the context of Vinaya. It was not taught in the context even of the perfection vehicle. Okay? So we have to understand where that teaching comes. Yeah. And that it is especially for people about to take highest class Tantra initiation. Yeah. And that teaching was given in ancient India, where the tantric practice was done very secretly, very privately, to avoid people misunderstanding statements such as that. Yeah. In Tibet and now in the West, these practices are widely disseminated. And like I said, some people have told me their very first Dharma teaching was they walked into an initiation. Yeah? So, we need to put these things in proper perspective. And even if we've taken a highest class Tantra initiation, yeah, I know for myself, I have great respect for my teachers, but there are some things where we just have different opinions, and I am not at the level where I can see everything that a teacher does as perfect. Another element is it doesn't mean everybody who is called a teacher, you're supposed to see their actions as perfect. It means you're tantric teachers, and you're the one who chooses it. So it doesn't mean everybody who has that title, because any, Tashi or Lobsang can go and give themselves the title of Lama. Okay. So that's why we have to check things out rather carefully. But, so what I'm getting at is we can hold different opinions in different situations and still have great faith and respect in our teachers. And His Holiness, the Dalai Lama, gives an example. And this is why I really recommend in the Foundation of Buddhist Practice, chapters, is it 4 and 5 that are on the relationship with the spiritual mentor. And His Holiness himself talks about, I don't know how much people know Tibetan history, but when His Holiness was quite young, there were, he had two tutors, Tata Rinpoche and Reting Rinpoche, and they were both the regents at one time or another because he was only a child. But Tata Rinpoche and Reting Rinpoche, or at least their entourages, we don't know which it was, but they were the head figures, were fighting. And it involved also the Sera Monastery. And there was physical violence going on between these two factions. And monks from Sera Monastery were taking out weapons. And it was a royal mess. Okay? And then Tata Rinpoche threw Reting Rinpoche in prison. He went blind. He died in prison. Yeah? So, a royal mess. And both of these regents were His Holiness teachers. So, in 1993, when we had a conference of Western Buddhist teachers with His Holiness, he told the story about his two tutors. And he said, when I'm in meditation, I think about their kindness and I'm doing the practices that they taught me, I regard them as Buddhas because nobody else has ever taught me anything as profound, as spiritually transformative as that. And so he said, in my practice, they are Buddhas. But, he said, when I come out of my meditation and I have to deal with the practical effects of running Tibet, I told both of my tutors, what you're doing is wrong, stop it. Okay? So His Holiness had the ability in one circumstance to see his teachers as perfect, and in another circumstance to deal with it in a practical way that was necessary according to the conventional circumstances. Okay? When he said this, most of us were like, how in the world do you put those two together? Because we had always been taught you've got to see everything your teacher does as perfect, or else you're going to be born in the hell realm. Okay? So it, this kind of became something I had to think about for a while. But it really made sense to me. And I really see His Holiness as being so incredibly practical. In one situation, you think like this. In another situation, you think like this. Those two things don't have to be contradictory. Because in the context of your meditation, that teacher is like a Buddha to you. In the context of practical affairs, His Holiness became leader of Tibet at age 15. I mean, do you remember what you were like at age 15? Could you become leader of a country at age 15? Oh my goodness. Yeah. But he had to think through things really, and that's how he dealt with it. And it's so practical, and he had great faith. And you see, even with Trijang Rinpoche, who was one of His Holiness's second set of tutors, Ling Rinpoche and Trijang Rinpoche, they had very different views on the practice of Jukden. Extremely different views. Yeah. But His Holiness, said that practice needs to be stopped because it is not beneficial to Tibetan society and it's dividing people. And so he spoke out very strongly against that practice. And yet one of his teachers was one of the people who had spread that practice before that. Okay. And yet His Holiness had a very good relationship with Trijang Rinpoche. He had gone to Trijang Rinpoche, explained why he had a different opinion, explained what he was going to do. Trijang Rinpoche said, fine, Okay? So I think that this is quite important for us to understand. Otherwise, we can get very, very rigid in our way of thinking, and we can get very, very afraid. And I've seen people get very afraid of, if I have a different opinion than my teacher about anything, it means I'm a bad disciple, I'm breaking my samaya, I'm going to hell. And that is not the case. Okay? And so, criticizing your teacher is a different ballgame. Having different views on things, that's fine. You don't have to criticize. You have somebody who has different views. Yeah? You can put your cups in upside down. I put myself up, right side up. Actually, I'm an upside down person. But for this example, I'm a right side up person. And we can have that difference of opinion. And, you don't need to think, I'm violating the relationship. Yeah. But if I start criticizing you and say, you think that the cup should go in upside down, you are totally stupid. Why are you thinking like that? You're blah, blah, you're an idiot, you're a jerk, blah, 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 you don't know anything. That kind of talk, that's what breaks the relationship. Yeah. When you're angry and you disparage your tantric master. Okay. But that's very different than having different opinions. Okay? So this is important to understand nowadays with some of the things that are happening in the Buddhist world. Okay? Then, going back to this thing of taking refuge, the difference between taking refuge in the Buddha, Dharma, Sangha and seeing your teacher, as a Buddha in the tantric sense, not in the Vinaya sense, not in the Bodhisattva sense, but in the tantric sense, that is different than taking refuge in Buddhist institutions. Okay? So you can be a practitioner of Tibetan Buddhism without belonging to a specific Tibetan religious institution. Okay? Yeah? Because like I said, institutions created by human beings they're supposed to protect the students, they're supposed to preserve the Dharma, but as we all know, because most of us, grew up in the West with, exposure to Judeo-Christian traditions, we see that often that isn't the purpose. The institution starts out with that being the purpose. But what happens is then the preservation of the institution becomes more important than the spiritual welfare of the people in the institution. Okay? That's degeneration. We've had so much exposure to it with the example of what the Catholic Church has been going through. You know, the abuse of children, the abuse of nuns. The thing with the nuns is now just starting to be talked about. And we see how much things have been covered up for the preservation of the church as an institution. Yeah, because people who have power within that institution are afraid that if they show any of their dirty laundry, people will lose faith and go away, and then the institution will fall down. And of course, their positions in the institution fall down, and they're afraid that maybe all of Catholicism will fall down without the church. I don't know what they're thinking, but maybe that. Okay? So the same kind of thing can happen in Buddhist institutions. Yeah, that the preservation of the organization becomes more important than the welfare of the students. But now what's happening, what we see in the U.S., is that, like I said before, it was if you expose the things that are degenerate, people will lose faith. Now it's more if you don't expose those things, if you don't talk about them, if you sweep them under the rug, then people will lose faith. So the whole dynamic has changed now in the West. In the Tibetan community, it hasn't changed. In the Tibetan community, all these things are right, under the rug. And we grew up in a society where things are under the rug, too, so we know how it is. It's nothing unusual. This is just human beings, in institutions. But it's something that we have to understand, so that we can see that we can have a wonderful relationship with our teacher, but we don't have to, that doesn't entail belonging to the same religious institution, or even our teacher's religious institution. Okay? So our relationship with our teacher is one thing, our relationship with the institution is something else. Yeah. And I think that's important to understand. Similarly, with institutions, we can talk about things that are happening that are not going well, and we can do that without trashing the whole institution. You can be a Catholic and say, the bishop's covering up of abuse is not conducive, to the spiritual practice of the Catholics, but that doesn't mean everything the church does is corrupt. Okay? So, and similarly with Buddhist things, we can say this particular thing is not going well, but that doesn't mean the whole institution is corrupt or degenerate. Yeah, and it's also up to each of us to find our own way in terms of how we relate to our teachers' institutions. Yeah, and that's fine. We create the relationship. We can be very involved in them. We can be not very involved with them. That's okay, because our relationship in our heart with our teachers is something, that's the important one. And that's why, this refuge of this verse of taking refuge is so important. Because it's saying, I take a refuge in the world-honored one. That's our direct connection with the Buddha. It's not saying I take refuge in the Buddhist institutions. Yeah, in our meditation practice, we have a direct line to the Buddha Dharma Sangha. Yeah, and that doesn't depend on the institutions. That's something that, like our ordinations. Our ordinations, in one sense, are between us and the Buddha. Yeah. We may not get along with the Buddhist institutions very well, but that doesn't mean that our ordination is worthless. Our ordination is directly with the Buddha. Okay? So I think these kinds of things are very important to understand. Otherwise, we can get very confused, like, I can't relate to my teacher's institution anymore. Does that mean I have to disrobe? No. What, you want to go out and kill somebody? Yeah, I mean, look at your root precepts, okay? Yeah, sure, maybe you don't like the institution. Yeah. Does not liking the institution go against any of your precepts? Do you really want to break your precepts? You want to go kill somebody? Yeah, you want to go steal something? You want to go sleep around? Yeah, you want to lie about your spiritual attainments? Yeah, if you want to do those things, then disrobe. But if you don't want to do those things, then what, yeah. I mean, if you really want to go to the movies, yeah, if you really want to listen to rock music, if you really want to drink and drug, okay, don't ordain or disrobe, go do that. But just because maybe you don't agree with everything in the religious institution, that is a totally different issue than your monastic ordination. And it's a different issue than your heart connection with your teacher. Okay, is this making some sense? Yeah. So this is the conclusions I came to after many years of anguish. Really, very hard, very difficult. But it's the way that, and His Holiness has really been, he's the one that puts it in a practical context like this. Yeah. So I figure if you follow His Holiness, you cannot go wrong. So let's chant the verse of taking refuge again. And then I'll explain the next verse.
Take refuge in the great world-honored ones who are able to cross over the sufferings of existence and the three realms. May all sentient beings entirely enter the bliss of Nirvana.
Then we'll go on to the next verse. So again, in the ordination, this is the point where you receive your robes and your bowls. So there's a couple of verses here to talk about. So the first one reads, "Guard integrity and aspiration. Cut the bonds of family and kin. Leave your worldly home to practice the Dharma. Aspire to lead all beings to full awakening." Okay, so again, a lot of meaning in a few words. So guard integrity and aspiration. That we could talk about for years. Okay? So integrity, integrity, having our own ethical standards that we've thought about and adopted, not because somebody else forced them on us, not because God set them down as commandments, but because we've thought about those actions, we've looked at our own experience, we've looked at the world around us, and we have decided that some actions of body and speech and mind too, we don't want to get involved with because they cause harm to ourselves and others. And we've discerned through our own experience and our own wisdom that there are other actions of body, speech, and mind that are conducive to sentient beings' well-being in the present and in the long term, and we want to do those actions. And so we have that sense, those values that we apply to ourselves. Okay? So that involves integrity. Our integrity of doing our best to live by the values that we ourselves have thought about and voluntarily adopted because they are conducive to our own and others' happiness in the long term. Okay? So this is very different than there's commandments put on us and we have to follow them or else we're going to hell. Yeah? And so it's important, when we study the Buddha Dharma, the Buddha outlined 10 non-virtuous actions. These are not commandments from the Buddha. Okay? They are not commandments from the Buddha. The Buddha simply saw, with his powers, that when sentient beings experience suffering, the cause, the karmic cause of that suffering was this group of actions. Any of those actions. And when sentient beings experience happiness, he saw that the type of actions that were the causes of that happiness were this group of actions here. So he just described this to us based on his own experience. However, it is up to us, because the Buddha emphasized we should always check everything he said. It's up to us to think about these 10. And, when we look around in life and we look in our own actions, are these 10 non-virtues the Buddha described, do they cause harm? And the abandoning of those 10 virtues, and then the 10 virtuous actions, which are the opposite, do they cause peace and well-being? Yeah. So it's up to us to look and to check, and not just, Buddha said that, so I better do it. And especially, we should not do things because we're afraid. Yeah? Okay. Now you're going to say, but there's this whole section in the Lam Rim about the lower realms. Yeah? And it goes on page after page describing in detail the 8 cold hells and the 8 hot hells and the intermediate hells. And there's so many different hells, It's like a chain of Marriott hotels or something. You can go from one to the next without, so, and especially if you've grown up in a culture or a religion where you learned as a kid, God said this, and if you don't follow it, read Dante. And that's where you're going to burn for eternity. Okay? First of all, in Buddhism, none of the realms are permanent. They're not eternal. Second of all, there's nobody sending you to any of those realms. It's just a result of our own actions. Okay? Third, look in your own mind. Does fear, let me start over. there's the stick approach and the carrot approach. Yeah? So you can move the donkey with the carrot in front, what he wants, or you can move the donkey by whacking him in the back and getting him to go. So there's two approaches. Look inside yourself, and both approaches can be useful at different times. Which approach motivates you more as an individual? Yeah. What approach motivates you? When you have something that is appealing that you can go towards, or when there's something that you're afraid of, that's hanging over you that you don't want to go near. Yeah. And we may be different, and there's a balance between these, because a wise kind of fear of danger can be very useful. When we learn to drive, having some fear of car crashes is very useful when you're learning to merge on the highway. Yeah. So there is a place for wisdom fear. Yeah, we don't want to throw all the fear away and, kind of get on the merging lane and just gun it, and, who cares in the lane next to us, we're going. That's not too smart. Okay, so there's a certain kind of wisdom fear that we need to have. It's not fear like panic fear, like, I'm terrified. I mean, when you merge on the highway, you're not like that, are you? Oh, God. Maybe the first time you merge on the highway, you're like that. When you're 16, and learning to drive, like, oh, God, if I wreck the car, my parents are going to kill me. I don't care if I get killed in the car accident, but my parents are going to kill me if I scratch the car. Yeah. I'm having memories of learning to drive and scratching the car. Yeah. Did you ever scratch your parents' car? Yeah. I don't wish it on anybody. Anyway, so, there's a role for an awareness of danger. Yeah. So the word fear, when they translate it from Tibetan, I think it's often better to translate as awareness of danger. Because when we hear the word fear in English, we think, I'm freaked out with fear. I'm terrified. I'm panicked. I can barely function. I'm so afraid. Yeah. The word fear can have that kind of connotation. But if somebody says, be aware of the danger, then okay, yes, I can be aware of the danger. Yeah. When you're learning to use a chainsaw, if somebody says, be afraid of cutting off your leg, or that's different than somebody saying, be aware of the danger of not paying attention when you're using the chainsaw. Okay? So, maybe to somebody who's 16 years old, you want to say, don't cut off your leg. But even then, with a 16-year-old, it may not work so well because they think that nothing bad is ever going to happen to them. Yeah. It's interesting, isn't it? When you're 16, yeah, you are immune to all the bad things, and you are also almost omniscient when you're 16. Yeah, we know everything when we're 16. Amazing how dumb we become as we age. So, yeah. So, there's a role for that awareness of danger, but there's also a role for look where you can go. Look, at your potential. Look at a future that you can create for yourself. Okay? So see what works better for you. And don't get into this thing. Yes, they teach the lower realms. If you've attended a lot of His Holiness's teachings, he reads, when he comes to the Lamrim, when he's giving the Lung, he just zips right through that and gives the Lung and doesn't make much commentary on it. Maybe a little bit. Yeah, talking about how other realms can exist or something like that. Other teachers will really go into the hell realms, to the point where it's like, get me out of here. Okay. So there's, what do they say? Different strokes for different folks. Yeah. So just see kind of what helps you in your integrity. Yeah. Do you want to have integrity because you're afraid? Or do you want to have integrity because you respect yourself and you know that at your heart you have a good intention? You want to do well in the world. We're sentient beings who make mistakes, but deep down we want to transform. We don't want to go out and cause harm and disruption in the world. We want to create peace in this world. So for our integrity, there is a good motivation in there. And sometimes our afflictions overwhelm us, and we want to get even with somebody and make them suffer because they made us suffer. And that's going against our integrity, but part of our integrity is when I make a mistake, I also confess it and I rectify it. I make amends. I don't sweep it under the carpet. Okay? So when it says guard integrity, integrity is very, very important. It has a lot to do with our own self-respect. Yeah? And living according to our values. Mm-hmm. Okay, so guard integrity and aspiration. So aspiration looks at what kind of person can I become? What is important in my life? What do I want to do? What can I contribute? What are my talents and abilities, and how can I share those with the world? Yeah, what do I aspire to do and to be? And I may not actualize all my aspirations, but that's okay, because just having those aspirations puts my mind in a good direction. Yeah, the great bodhisattvas have incredible aspirations. Yeah, when you read the Mahayana Sutras, what those bodhisattvas aspire to do is amazing. Even when we hear the story of Chenrezig going to the lower realms and emptying them out each day. I mean, do you know what it takes to lead sentient beings from the lower realms? Oh my God. I mean, it's so difficult to get them to do anything simple when they're human beings, let alone get them out of the lower realms. But Chenrezig would do that, and then the next morning show up, and the lower realms are filled with more sentient beings. And he started to cry one time. He was going, I work so hard and they don't appreciate me. I don't think Chenrezig got that bad. But maybe his tear wasn't that. Maybe his tear was out of compassion for all these beings who want to be happy and continue to create the cause for the lower realm. So he started to cry, and one of his tears turned into Tara. And she said, I'll help you. Yeah. So, but look at that aspiration. I'm going to empty the lower realms of all sentient beings. Is that possible? No. Do we aspire to do it? Yes. Why do we aspire to do something that's impossible? Because if we inspire for something so huge and magnificent, and it uplifts our mind and, gets us really enthusiastic about practicing, then when a situation comes up in our life in front of our nose where we can do even one small thing to help somebody, we won't hesitate. Okay? So if you have a big aspiration, then there's a small thing to do to help somebody, no problem. If you don't have a big aspiration and you're afraid, oh my God, I'm going to say that I'm going to liberate all these beings from the hell realm, let's modify that. I will liberate them all from, well, how about if I'm just nice to my cats? It's like that's all I'm capable of. I'm just going to aspire to be nice to cats. If that's the level of your aspiration, and then a dog shows up at the Abbey, you're not going to help the dog because you only had a small aspiration to help cats. Yeah. So that poor dog's going to, be whining. If you have an aspiration to help all sentient beings and the dog shows up, then you're going to help the dog. Okay? So, guard integrity and aspiration. Okay? Cut the bonds of family and kin. So we've talked about that before. Yeah? Your parents can't make you a child. You are always their child, and you respect your parents and you appreciate them. But you don't have to follow all their advice if their advice is contrary to the Dharma. Yeah? So, because remember in the past it says your parents can't make you a child and the king can't make you a servant or whatever it is. Yeah? So your allegiance, our allegiance now, is to the Buddha Dharma Sangha. Yeah, as somebody said in their BBC, we've given our life to the Buddha Dharma and Sangha. Yeah, so we cut the bonds of family and kin. So our old friends, yeah, it's something that everybody goes through because you start practicing Dharma, you love the Dharma, you go back to be with your old friends, and you love your old friends, but now you don't really want to do everything they're doing. Yeah? Because what they're doing, you used to do all that stuff with them and you had a good time with them, but now you've changed and your ethical standards have changed and you don't want to do that anymore. Yeah? And then there's this period of internal conflict. But these are my friends. Do I just, kick all my friends out? Do I have to leave all my friends to practice the Dharma? And there's a period of confusion everybody goes through. And then you realize that you can make friends in the Dharma. And that those friends really encourage you in virtue. And they understand your spiritual yearning. And they don't say to you, why are you going to a Dharma retreat on vacation? Go get a life. Stop just wasting your time looking at your belly button. Let's go to the Virgin Islands. Let's go to Cancun. So, your Dharma friends aren't saying that. So, you're polite to your old friends, but then you kind of drift in different directions. I'm still in touch with a few old friends. They kind of get in touch with me more, at different times. I just got an email from one who writes me maybe once a year, once every 2 years, just kind of just say, are you still alive? And I write back, yes. And I know he's still alive, and that's good, and that's all it needs to be, And then there was one college friend. We were very good friends in college, and I went because she became a professor of religion, and so I went to her university to give some talks, and I was staying in her home. And I was staying in kind of their den room, and the in the living room, the sofas were covered by plastic. Yeah, and in the den were all the family photographs, and I just got the heebie-jeebies big time. Yeah, don't ask me to give you the definition of the heebie-jeebies. Yeah, they are a mental factor, which, yeah, yeah. But it was like, oh my God, my life could have turned out like this. Yeah. Does living room with plastic over the sofa mean something to you? Do you have the same association that I do? So it's like, and I've seen how her life has turned out, and yeah. Anyway, I have a lot of compassion for her, but I really got the heebie-jeebies. Yeah, and so you make new friends, and that's fine, and you're kind to your old friends, but you realize that your lives are in different directions. Yeah. Okay, so cut the bonds of family and kin. Leave your worldly home to practice the Dharma. Okay, so in the verse we'll chant it tomorrow. In the 37 practices about give up your homeland. Yeah, that's what it means. Your homeland, your family, your worldly home, where everybody knows you, where you have a role, where you get sucked into that role, where you experience so much social pressure to think in a certain way and act in a certain way. Yeah? Do you have pressure from your family to think and act in a certain way? Yeah? When you go visit them, do you all of a sudden become like a 6-year-old again? Trying to please mom and dad, or rebelling against mom and dad, or, you look in family dinners, and so often people just play the same role every family dinner. Yeah. Somebody said that's why they call it a nuclear family. We know how to push each other's buttons. So what we're trying to do is leave that behind, okay? And not just leave it behind because we hate them and we're rejecting them. No, it's because we're leaving them to practice the Dharma. Because the Dharma is what's really important. Transforming our minds, benefiting sentient beings, preserving the teachings is important. And then aspire to lead all beings to full awakening. That's what we want to do. Okay? So, let's do this verse.
God, integrity and aspiration, cut the bonds of family and kin. Leave your worldly home to practice the Dharma. Aspire to lead all beings to full awakening. Guard integrity and aspiration. Cut the bonds of family and kin. Leave your worldly home to practice the Dharma. Aspire to lead all beings to full awakening. Guard integrity and aspiration. Cut the bonds of family and kin. Leave your worldly home to practice the Dharma. Aspire to lead all beings to full awakening.
Okay. So at that time, that's when the tufts of hair get cut. Yeah. And the Upajjhaya says, I'm going to cut it. Are you sure? Do you want me? Yeah. Do you agree with me to cut your hair? In other words, nobody's forcing you. This is your choice. Yeah. And they ask 3 times. Make sure. Okay. So let's pause here. Maybe there's some questions.
You were talking about compassion earlier, and I was wondering that, well, sometimes I have compassion with someone, but it's merely projection from myself, because I hate plastic coverings, but other people are happy with them.
Uh-huh.
So I was wondering what you could say about that.
The issue, I wasn't having compassion for her because she had plastic coverings. If she wants to have plastic coverings, that's fine with me. Okay? And I'm sure they protect her furniture very well. Plastic coverings have a certain meaning for me. I don't know if they have that same meaning for her or not, but they have a meaning for me. Okay? And I don't want to go to where I don't want to live the life of what plastic coverings on sofas means to me.
Could you then explain then what
You
kind
wanna
of
know more?
compassion?
Okay, so what plastic covers on sofas mean to me? How do I even, let's see, because it's a family home where you preserve the good furniture for when the company comes, but you don't use the good furniture yourself. And because you're preserving the good furniture for when the company comes, if as a child you go into that room and you make a mess in that room, and despite the sofas being covered, you harm anything in that room, you're in trouble. And so the whole, it's not just that, it's the whole, how do I explain it? The whole, huh? Okay, help me. What is it? Yeah.
Not a home. You've got this whole part of your house where it just sits there and nobody can use it. You don't live there. It's kind of sterile, dead.
Sterile and dead. That's it. That's it. Yeah. Yeah. It's sterile and dead, and that's what you give to the company.
And also, at least in my family, it comes from the result of going through the Depression and the war, and so it's a big mind of lack. We've got it, and so now we're going to keep it forever, and it's permanent, and don't touch it.
Yeah.
For me, there's also a component about maybe I'm not good enough to use this furniture. Maybe other people, it's for them, but I just, neither me nor the children nor anyone that lives here is good enough to touch it, to look at it, to sit on it, to even smell it, so.
Yeah. There's that element too. Yep.
Boy. Yeah, the feeling as a child that home was not a place that you could put your feet up and lay on the couch and look out the window. There was a disciplinary action that came from getting anywhere near that furniture. So, a serious disciplinary action for getting anywhere near that furniture. And there, and so
She's
and so
right.
that particular room imputed a lot of fear, a sense of danger. You're not worthy. It's not yours. You're not worth it. And
and it's beautiful and perfect,
perfect.
and you aren't.
And you aren't, and therefore, and when the company comes and that all that stuff gets taken off, they must think, boy, these children are really well behaved. Look at how nice this. The impression is not the truth of what happens when they're not there. So the children don't put their shoes on the sofa. Look at, they're not torn. It looks brand new. Gosh, your children are so well behaved. I mean, there's an attachment to how your family perceives you too. And I agree with Venerable Jigme. It's also an outcome of a very struggling generation where
Yeah.
poverty and what you had was a sign of you survived.
Yeah. Yeah, because all of us were from the same generation who say that. Yeah.
Not from that generation, but I hated the plastic on these bowing cushions. So next time we have posada, they are not on it.
Please take them off, because I put my hands on them and they squeak. Yeah. Because those are perfect, and we've got them, and we don't want them to get destroyed. And our dirty hands are not worthy of being put on those bowing cushions. Okay, other questions? Yeah.
I think this might be a silly question, but why is everything chanted?
Because the melodies evoke something inside your heart.
I'm just curious. So you talked about having a heart connection with your teacher,
Mm-hmm.
and what if your teacher does something that that results in you wanting to break the relationship? Not really follow them anymore. What do you do with that heart connection after that?
Okay, well, first of all, what is holiness recommended in the situation where if your teacher does something that you find just too beyond, he said you keep a respectful distance and you remain grateful to that teacher for what they did give you. Yeah. So it's not like, okay, this person now, they did something that you find awful. That doesn't mean everything they taught you was bad. It doesn't mean everything about them is bad. Yeah. It means you keep a respectful distance. Maybe you don't go to teachings with them anymore. But still in your heart, you have that same appreciation, because without their kindness, you wouldn't have gotten as far as you are right now. Yeah. So I think that the teaching to see the Guru as a Buddha is actually meant to prevent us from throwing the teacher out with the bathwater. Okay, which we tend to do. Somebody does something that we think is bad, then everything about them is bad and wrong, and we just, have to dissociate ourselves completely. Yeah? And if we do that, then there's the risk of people saying, well, but these people taught me all the Dharma. That means the Dharma's wrong. That means the Dharma doesn't work. Yeah? There's that risk. But because a teacher has misbehaved, that doesn't mean the Dharma is bad, wrong, or doesn't work. It just means that teacher misbehaved. And that teacher at that moment was not following the Dharma. So, but because we tend to mush everything together, I think that's one of the reasons why that teaching was taught, because that way you don't lose faith in the teacher, so you don't lose faith in the Dharma they taught you and throw the Dharma out with the bathwater. Okay? So you remain, you can still have that kind of gratitude and deep respect, but you maintain a respectful distance, and you don't, kind of criticize them from the heavens to the hells and up and down and across. It's like, okay, I've got to take a step back here.
Something about you, the last comment that you made about that this is a voluntary choice. And it's easy to obviate the fact that we're choosing to do this voluntarily, but it's actually an important, very important point because it kind of goes back to motivations. Like, why are we doing this? Why do we want to be ordained? Why do we think that this is where we want to go in life? And it's important because when the hard times come, when we face obstacles, when difficulties arise, when we're having issues with the institution or having issues with the teacher or having issues with the community, the thing that keeps us going is that motivation, is the fact that we're here voluntarily. And so if we sort of skip that over or don't give it its proper attention and place, then the difficulties will be more difficult.
Yeah, they get amplified. Yeah. Very true. And, to remember always, I chose to be here, and there's going to be difficulties in the practice. And it's not the Dharma that's difficult, it's not the ordination that's difficult, it's my afflictions that are difficult. Yeah. So it might be very painful now. Yeah. But the direction I'm going in is one that's really good. So I'm going to keep going in that direction. Because what else am I going to do? Yeah. You want to go to the bar? Yeah. You want to go to the disco? Well, they don't have discos. What do they have now? Strip joints? Yeah. You want to go there? Yeah. You want to go where? To the soccer match? Yeah. If we don't do this, what are we going to do? Yeah. It's like in samsara, we've done everything already. And look where it's gotten us. So, okay, it's hard. That doesn't matter. Samsara is harder. Isn't it? Samsara is much harder. And there's no respite from it. So if we go through some difficulty in our practice, it's okay. We've got to have that mind that doesn't solidify the difficulty and say this is going to last forever. It's like, okay, I'm having a difficulty. My mind is completely confused. I think I'm right. I can't put this all together. But if I sit down and keep practicing and go through things and seek advice from, wise practitioners, look in the scriptures for what the Buddha advises, I'll make it through and I'll come out stronger. Okay, so you've got to have that kind of attitude. Yeah? Otherwise, every time you face a problem, this is too hard, I'm taking my marbles and going home. I gave you some marbles, give them back to me. I don't want you to be my friend anymore. Okay, so let's dedicate.